Hello everybody, here is the completed Seahorse kit, and this is the instruction video to show you how to assemble it. So I just want to show you it in its completed form, and we are going to get right to building it. Let me crank it a little bit so you can see the action of the kit. You'll notice that the seahorses move up and down as they swivel about. So let's get started with the construction. Before we start the construction of the kit, I just want to explain that as the construction process goes on, we will be adding more and more gears to the kit until eventually you've added quite a lot of gears, as you can see here with the kit almost fully assembled. As you add a gear, you increase the friction of the mechanism, and the more gears you add, the more friction you add, and sooner or later you get to a point where the kit really needs to be lubricated. Now, it's a wooden kit. You do not want to use oil. I have found that talcum powder works terrifically well. So what I do, and I do it throughout the construction of the kit, I take my kit into my bathtub, I hold it over the bathtub, and I sprinkle talcum powder. Now, to tell you the truth, underneath this white label that says talcum powder, this is actually Dr. Scholl's foot powder. I was a little embarrassed to say I put foot powder over my kits, but the truth is it's basically made out of talc. Now, baby powder works as well too, so feel free, but the talcum powder really does work as a fantastic lubricant. So you're going to hear me mention it again, but just remember, as you add the gears, if you have trouble rotating them, do not force it. Go into the bathtub, sprinkle the talcum powder over the kit, carefully rotate the kit, allow the talcum powder to permeate the wood and work itself in and lubricate the kit, and you will notice it'll start to spin really beautifully. Blow off all the talcum powder and go back to building the kit. And every time you add some gears, if the assembly gets a little bit difficult to crank, just add the talcum powder. Eventually you blow it all off. You'll notice there is a little bit of residue here and there, but the kit ends up smelling like a baby. So enjoy building the kit, and you will see the construction start as soon as this video ends. Okay everybody, we're going to begin to assemble the Seahorse kit. So to start with, let's gather the parts that I'm showing here. Now, this is the base. We're going to set this aside for a minute and get to it pretty shortly, but just for now, let's take it out. These are these end and side pieces. They're taped together. We're going to be working with those. This is the packet of hardware. This is the bottom piece, and I'll talk about this in a little minute. Here is a small screwdriver. These are the two side frame pieces that have the engravings on them, so you can see the engravings on them right there. And I have my trustworthy bowl. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you know I like working with my bowl, so I have my bowl here. And in fact, I'm going to start off by taking my little Ziploc bag filled with all my screws and nuts, and I'm just going to empty it into the bowl, just like that. Okay, and we're going to, let's put the base to the side for now, because we're not going to really need this. And let me put these side pieces just to the side for a second as well. Let's just talk about this bottom piece. As you can see, it kind of comes pre-assembled, but it's possible it will have separated in shipping or something like that. So just so you understand what it consists of, it has this piece that has these tabs on it, and hammered into it are these what these are sometimes referred to as T-nuts or blind nuts. I've heard them referred to in both terms, and those are 832 threads that are in them, and then this piece fits on top of it. So this probably will come as a complete assembly, and it'll just make life a little bit easier for you. So let's just put that aside. Let's break open our tape. So these pieces are taped with a piece of paper in there, so there's no issue with the tape sticking to the wood, which can be annoying. Now, before we actually start construction, let me just talk about these side pieces. First off, they have, just like some of the other kits that Bibbys Models makes, it has countersink or sunk holes on this face of the piece of wood. So this will be the outside piece. Now this is also the other outside piece. They have also countersunk holes. These are mirror images of each other. So if I put them together like this, you'll see that everything matches, all the holes match, and the countersinks are on the outside. You'll also notice that these designations, the shaft designations, are shown here. There's a cross here, and a cross here, and a cross here. That's a single cross. So this is shaft 1. This next one, you'll notice, has 2 crosses. Two. This is shaft 2, shaft 3, and shaft 4. And of course, there are also these very cool little engravings of fish and a frog. We have on the other side, we have some lobsters, some sea turtles, and some more fish swimming around. And the reason why there's no engravings in this area is there'll be gears and other mechanisms here that would block them anyway. Now, just a word of warning, the pieces of wood up here are supposed to simulate grass, because seahorses love to swim in grass. These are pretty delicate. It's very easy to break these. I've broken a couple myself. If it does break, hopefully it will not break completely off. It will kind of snap but still be attached. Very carefully bend it back and put a little drop of glue and let it dry for a while, and everything will be okay. Now, if you happen to have CA cement, if you're a model maker like I am, I do have CA cement. It goes by different names. This company's called Zap. There's other companies, but if you do have the CA glue, which is basically crazy glue, this is the thin kind. That works incredibly well for gluing it together, and then you can also follow it up with what is the kicker. Now, don't go out and buy this stuff if you don't already have it. You don't need to. The Elmer's wood glue will work perfectly well, or the white glue will even work perfectly well for gluing it if it should break. So, also, if it does break, the kit looks perfectly good with some of these things missing. So if it does break and you can't glue it back on, honestly, I would just leave it off. You could take an emery board and just file it clean, and it really, no one would know the difference anyway. So after having said that, we'll be careful and we'll start assembly right now. Okay, we're going to start assembling the frame, and we're first going to assemble the frame and then attach that assembled frame to the base. And we're going to start by taking this bottom piece. Now make sure these T-nuts are on the top side, and grab one of the frames, doesn't matter really which one, and with the engraving on the outside, place these like this so that the tabs go into their corresponding slots on the front side. Now I'm going to take one of these 440 nuts, and this is a little tricky. Let me make sure I get it on the camera. I'm going to slide it into this slot right here, and if you rotate the nut so the flat of the nut is lined up with that slot, it will fit right in there with absolutely no problem. So I just have to make sure I rotate it. There, it went in, no problem. And now I'm going to pick one of the flathead screws up and stick it in this hole. Using my screwdriver, I'm going to get it started in the nut. Okay. And sometimes it takes a little bit to align the screw with the nut, but as you can see on the camera, the nut is in the slot. You can see it, and everything is lined up. Now what you want to do is you're going to do it on this side and this side, and then we'll take it from there. I've gotten all 3 of these nuts in, and now I have kept the screws a little loose. So now I'm just going to go around and sequentially tighten it a little bit. Everything looks good. Okay. Now I'm going to grab one of these side pieces, And I'm going to come up to, let's say, this side, and I'm going to put the tab facing down, put it right in here, and just get it to twist into the sidewall right there. And just with a little poke, you can get that to go in. And now again, I'm going to slide one of these nuts right into that slot. Oops, I wanted to put that on the camera, but so let me just get this right like this. Put that in just like that. Holding it with my fingers is definitely the best approach. And as soon as that screw finds itself into the center of the nut, you can just tighten that up. Okay, and now we're going to do the exact same thing on this side. Okay, I've successfully put on both of these side pieces here, and now I have this one little cross piece that has to go on as well. So I'm going to grab the nut. I think I'll put this one in first. Put the nut in first. Then I'm going to push this piece in like that. And then let me follow it up with one of these flathead screws. Okay, so this entire first half is complete. We just now have to put the other half on. Alright, we're now ready to attach the other side of this kit together, which goes right here. Now the only problem is once you put that piece of wood on this face, it is virtually impossible to hold the nuts into these slots with your fingers. So as we have done on our other kits, we're going to temporarily tape the nuts in place. Now, it's important to realize that the piece of wood is going to flush right up against this surface, which would be on these surfaces, it'll be the lower surface. It'll be the lower surface. I want to make sure the tape does not stick above this surface. But as far as taping these nuts in is concerned, it's really simple. I'm just going to, in fact, I'll start with this little cross piece here that you can see. Now I know my fingers are kind of blocking what I'm doing, but all I'm doing is sliding the nut in. The hardest part of this is probably just rotating the nut until it goes in, but once it goes in, it should be very easy to tape this in position temporarily. There it goes. So just to show you how easy it is, I just have a teeny bit of tape in there. It's sticking out. It doesn't really matter as long as it doesn't go above this surface. Everything will be good. So, and then after you tape it in, you can go back and try to center the nut as best you can. Like that. That looks pretty good. I don't know if the camera is picking up the centered part, but that's pretty well centered. Okay, so I'm just going to tape all the nuts in and we'll go back to it. Okay, I have taped all the nuts into place, so I just want everyone to see that they're taped. This, incidentally, is by far and above the worst part of building this kit in terms of just sort of being a pain. Everything else after this is so much simpler. Now we're going to put this right on top here. Make sure, again, the tabs line up. So you may have to do a little finagling to get it in. Now keep in mind though, the nuts are sort of precariously taped in place, so be gentle when you put these screws in. So you have to make sure that the screws line up with the nuts. You may have to do a little adjustment. Oh, that was way out of the camera, but anyway, you may have to do a little adjustment here and there to make sure that the screw finds its way into the nut. Now, I highly recommend that you put all of the screws in before you tighten down on the nuts. Now, this little cross piece has not gone in properly, so I'm going to have to kind of be very careful. Come in there. Okay, got it. Got it to go in. I felt it kind of go into position, and again, I'm going to be very careful. If you look inside it, you can sort of see the nut. The second the screw threads into the nut's not going to fall out. So you don't really have to worry about it after that. Now here's this piece here, same sort of situation. Let me see if I can get the screw in, making sure it finds itself into the nut. It's going in. I feel it going into the nut. Okay, so we've done 3 out of 6. These bottom ones I'm a little bit concerned with, but again, it should be pretty straightforward. Sometimes it helps to turn the screw backwards a little just to get it to find its way in. So here is the middle one. Again, you can actually see it. I can see the nut. It's such a good feeling once you get a couple of threads in there and you know the nut has been made captive, I should say. That's what they call these things, captive screws. Okay, success. All 6 screws are in. Now I'm just going to go around and tighten them all. Okay. Be careful not to let the screwdriver slip out, because if it slips out, it may scratch across the engraving and you may do a little damage to your beautiful little fish or your lobster or whatever it is that you have. Okay, the 2 pieces are together, and now it is time to remove the tape, because we definitely do not want tape on our final kit. So just go around. Be very careful with these pieces of grass. These wooden pieces of grass are delicate, so when you come in here to pull the tape out, don't break the grass. And now we'll get these pieces off the bottom. Okay. And let's just make sure this is shaft number 4, and on the other side, yes, this is shaft number 4. But everything looks really good, and you can also feel it's quite strong too. Okay, let's attach it to the base. Okay, to attach the frame to the base is very simple. We're going to use these 2 832 screws. You'll notice that on the back side of the base, the holes are counterbored. So what you can do is you can run these screws right through the bottom like this. Okay, and now when you grab the top, if you remember, you had those blind nuts, or those T-nuts. They're sometimes called T-nuts. And let's just screw these together. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take one of these screws out for now. Let me just work with one of these. So let's just get that screw to get going. It's a little hard to get it to go, so sometimes what I like to do is separate it a little bit. Then I can actually see what little adjustments I have to make to get the screw to go. So this screw is started, so now what I'll do is I'll move on to the second screw. Just make sure everything is good. Again, if you separate it a little bit, you can actually see the screw, and you can make whatever adjustments you have to make to have it work right. Now I'm going to just flip this over. Both screws have been started. I'm using my small screwdriver here. Could possibly, this actually works fine, because the amount of torque you need on this screw is relatively small, so even this little screwdriver is fine. But if you do have a bigger screwdriver, just screw those down. And now here we have the frame attached to the base, and we're good to go. Okay, now we're going to assemble shaft 1, which goes in here. Now make sure you have the kit oriented such that the shaft 1 hole is on the right, and this particular piece of grass sort of looks like a trident. So make sure that the trident is facing here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take shaft 1. Now just once again, it has a single cross, there it is, that single little cross indicates shaft 1. We're going to put a 12-tooth gear onto the shaft, and then we'll put one of these nylon flanged washers with the flange on this side, and then we're going to slide this through the housing right here. And now I'm going to just rotate the entire kit around, holding the backside with my finger, and now I'm just going to simply put another of the flange washers with the flange facing the housing like that. Make sure it seats itself, and then what we put in are 3 of these washers that have a cross in the middle, and these are basically spacers. And make sure everything is seated properly. You heard that little snap, it had kind of slipped away, so it's now back in its proper position. And now we're going to put the handle on, and the handle can go in any orientation that you want. And now there is a screw and a nut, so rotate the handle so that the head of the screw is in a convenient place to tighten it. And you can apply a little pressure. You don't want to squeeze it too tight because it'll be too difficult to turn, but you can apply a little pressure. If the nut below is turning, you can just hand hold it. I don't think you need a pliers or anything. You can just hand hold the washer, and just, once you tighten it, just make sure it spins nice and freely. We will now tackle putting shaft 2 into the housing. Now, shaft 2 is a little unusual looking. It's this long tapered shaft. So find that bag, and once again, just to show you how much I believe in this bowl, I'll show you. I'm going to make sure it's in the camera this time when I empty it out into the bowl. And to begin, before we begin, let me just look at this shaft for a second and just show you a couple of things. It has some grooves in it on 2 ends, and this is going to hold an O-ring. And then, believe it or not, if you look carefully, there's holes drilled right through the middle of the shaft, and they're going to take a pin. It's a teeny tiny hole. It's just big enough for a pin. So to start with the construction here, I think what we will do is we will grab one of the O-rings, and we'll start from one end of the shaft. And again, this is shaft number 2. It is designated with 2 crosses, and you put that O-ring right there on the shaft like that. And now I'm going to slide one of these cross washers in. Now it's a little weird. You have to make sure you orient it properly so it will slide. I'm going to slide this all the way down until it's butted up against the O-ring like this. And now I'm going to take the 24-tooth gear, and again, make sure you line it up with the cross shaft so it goes in like that. Okay, so we have O-ring, washer, 24-tooth gear, and then we will put a flanged nylon washer with the flange facing this way, and now this is going to go through the shaft, through the hole, and make sure it meshes with this gear here. Now we're going to flip it around. This gets a little trickier now, just holding it. We're going to put, as you might well guess, the other nylon flanged washer there, and then what we're going to put is this 8-tooth gear. Okay, we'll now put this 8-tooth gear there. Let me just make sure I orient it properly. And we put the cross washer. I'll put the better looking side on the outside like this, and then the O-ring goes on to that. Now when seating this, make absolutely certain that the shaft is butted up against everything, because the 2 grooves for those O-rings are fairly precise. If these, for whatever reason, if this shaft isn't seated properly, then this O-ring will not be in the groove. But that looks good. So that is shaft number 2, and let's just rotate it. Oh, it feels very smooth already. Very nice. Okay. The next step we're going to do is to put shaft 3 into the model kit. And I have the kit oriented right now with the handle facing me. It's not super critical how you put this in, but I think this is a little simpler. Find the bag that has shaft 3 and the rest of the parts that go into this step, and let's empty it into the bowl. Alright, I'm going to take shaft number 3 and just make sure there are the 3 cross marks on it, and take one of these cranks. Now here's a part we haven't seen yet in the kit, but this is called a crank shaft, and or I should say a crank, and we're now going to just simply attach it to the end of this shaft. I have my small screwdriver handy, and make sure the shaft does not stick out beyond the crank's face. You might even want to put it a little, just a little bit below the surface, just to be on the safe side. We don't want any rubbing to occur. And now you can just tighten this up. As I said, no need to use pliers. You can just hold this nut with your fingers and tighten it. It doesn't have to be insanely tight. And after we do that, we're going to slide the 24 tooth gear on. Now, one side has a little more burn from the laser. If you like the burn, put that on the outside. If you don't, keep it the cleaner side on the outside. And I'm going to slide the crank onto the gear, and then I'm going to grab one of the nylon flanged washers. Just make sure the flange is up. And now we're going to slide this into the hole and make sure that the gear meshes with the 8-tooth gear on the other side. And also make sure that the nylon flanged washer seats itself properly. Now we're going to flip it over to the other side, and we're going to grab the other nylon flanged washer and put that up against there. And the next thing we're going to do is take 3 of these washers with the little cross hole in them. These are spacers. So we're going to take 3 of them. That gives us enough space to clear the face of this gear. And now we're going to stick the other crank on to the shaft. Now the important thing about this is as follows. These 2 cranks have to be put in at 90 degrees from each other. So just to make sure everything is fully understood, I'll rotate this until this crank is in about the 12 o'clock position vertically. Now I'm going to very carefully rotate the model back around, and now I'm going to make sure this shaft goes, it can go either in this position or this position. It doesn't matter. I just want to make sure it's 90 degrees apart. I'm noticing that the head of the screw is sticking up this way, so I'm going to put it on here so I can easily tighten the screw. Now again, this one's up, and this one is horizontal, and that's a beautiful situation. Now before you tighten the screw, once again, maybe squeeze this a little bit, not super tight, and now go in and just tighten this little screw. The key to these things is you don't want it so tight that it won't turn easily. So you want to get a little slop out, but you don't want it super tight either. So if you feel like maybe it's a little too loose, you can loosen up this screw a little bit, push this in a little bit, and then tighten it back up. As I've said with these kits, loose is better than tight. Now once you have this on, let's give it a quick turn. Ooh, it turns very nice. It's very smooth. Everything looks really, really, really good. Now we will do shaft number 4. Alright, it's time to put in the final shaft, shaft number 4. And again, the bag with shaft number 4 and the rest of the parts is going to be dumped into the bowl. This shaft goes together very easily, similar to what we just did. I'm going to start off by putting a crank on the shaft. And once again, Make sure that the shaft does not stick beyond the face of the crank. You can even make it a little under the surface if you want. I'm going to just tighten that by hand. Now I'm going to simply take, now this, let me just make sure we do this correctly. The handle of the kit is facing me right now. On this part, on the side that has the handle, I'm going to put 2 of these spacers right up against the crank. 1 and 2. And now I'm going to put one of the nylon flanged washers. And now I'm going to insert this crank into the hole for shaft number 4. Spin the model around. And as you probably are guessing already, or know, another nylon flanged washer is going to go there, followed by, on this side, there are 3 spacers. So there is a teeny bit of asymmetry here, asymmetric by one of these washers. Now, once again, I want to point out, let me crank this. Right now, this crank is in the horizontal position. I'm going to rotate this one into the horizontal position too. Now, when I rotate the model, I'm going to put the remaining crank in the same orientation as the one on the other side. So when I turn it around, I see that that crank is up, and I'm now going to put this one up as well. So I'm going to put it up. Make sure everything again is seated. I'm going, now this shaft is not attached to anything, so you can just freely rotate it to whatever position you want. I'm going to tighten the screw now. Just have to rotate these until the screw is in a good position to tighten. If the nut, I believe the nut is spinning on the other side, so what I'm going to do is just hold that nut with my finger, come back around, tighten this up, make sure these are a bit, and now I'm just going to spin this by hand to make sure it's free and spins really smoothly. Now, as I mentioned before, when you're building this kit, it is a great idea to always use talcum powder. So as you are using or putting on more and more gears, I frequently take the talcum powder, go into my bathtub, put the kit in up, over my bathtub, and I sprinkle talcum powder all over it, or baby powder, anything like that, and then work the mechanism slowly, turning the crank, and let that talcum powder cover everything and let it work its way into all the teeth and all the gears. And then once the mechanism starts to spin really beautifully, you can blow most of the talcum powder off and your kit will smell like a baby. It'll be beautiful. But if you look carefully, I don't know if the camera can really pick it up, there's a couple little white marks in here that are left over from the talcum powder sprinkling, but it really makes a difference in terms of the motion. Okay, we now go on to the next step, which is building the seahorses. Okay, we're going to start construction of one of the sides of the seahorse kit right now. And before we start, I just want to show you the kit comes with a lot of these control horns, more than you need to complete the kit. They are only different from each other in the orientation of this little square hole that's on this side of them. You can see there's actually a designation. This says 30, that stands for 30 degrees. So this square hole is tipped 30 degrees from the normal position. This one's 45, and there are a few others, and some are straight. So you have the ability, and when you see how this construction goes, you'll understand how it works, but you'll have the ability to orient the seahorses in slightly different ways so the model looks more realistic. The length of these seahorses can also be modified. We'll talk about that later, but right now all the seahorses are going to be at the same height. If after you complete the kit you think to yourself, oh, I'd like some of these seahorses to be at like different heights, you can chop this down and reposition the seahorse at a new height. So I'll talk about that later. But for now, let's just start the assembly. It's super simple. So we're going to slide a wooden washer up to this little stop notch right there in the seahorse. We'll just put this over. Now I'll just tell you this ahead of time. If you decide to change the height of some of these seahorses and you cut the stick, you're going to lose this little stopper. So you may have to glue the wooden washer in position to hold it, although friction may hold it fine, so you'll just have to experiment. Once we've done this, I'm going to take one of the seahorses and slide it into this hole and flip it over, and be careful because, as I said, these are kind of fragile. I'm going to put a washer on this side, and for this particular seahorse, I'm orienting it straight. It doesn't really matter, and I'm going to use the 30-degree control horn. Slide that on, put another washer there, and then the O-ring is used to do the final procedure. Just slide this O-ring with your finger, and now this is how it works. The seahorse is going to be positioned like this, and there'll be a link that controls, it's going to swivel the seahorse as you crank the handle. So we'll finish populating the rest of this. You can choose any of these control horns you want, and you'll see what results you get, and then you can always swap them out later if you want to change it. Okay, I've completed populating this piece of wood with the seahorse figures, and if you want to get an idea of how it's going to look, you can align all of these control horns so they're all sticking straight out like this, and then look at the seahorses, and that's how they're going to look when the kit is in a certain position in its cycle, and then they'll all swivel from there. So right now I have one facing this way, one seahorse is facing a little this way, and this one's facing the opposite. So that looks good to me, but you could easily just take off this control horn, rotate that seahorse to a different angle, and put it back if you want that seahorse facing a completely different direction. So you can play around with it, and you have to do this same assembly to the other side, and then the kit is almost complete. Okay, I think before we mount this assembly of seahorses onto the kit, we're going to first put these links in place. I think it'll be a little easier. So before we do that, take one of these 256 screws, and what we're going to do is we're just going to establish threads in these little holes. So just makes life a little easier. You can run a screw into it real quickly and then take it out and put it into the next hole, and do this with all of these remaining holes on these links. Once you've threaded these holes, let's attach it to the kit as follows. Now this is a little delicate, but what I think is maybe the easiest thing to do is we're going to put the screw through that control horn, and I'm just going to put the link behind it and just screw this a little bit down. Now you can see the real advantage of pre-threading these holes. Now do not tighten this, keep it nice and loose because it's going to swivel. I leave a nice little gap in there. I'm just going to do this with all of these. Putting this one in. What I like about this too is you can see these screws. These are nice brass screws, so you can see these screws after the kit is completed because the heads of the screws will be facing up, which is very nice. Oops, I'm not putting this in right. Make sure it goes in the hole. I almost put that screw in the little slot in front. Okay, so now let's just finish this up. Okay, remember, keep those screws nice and loose, and now this is kind of the action that we're hoping to achieve. Now you see there's also a little slit in that link. So now I'm going to bring the kit over, and I'm going to rotate this around to this side. This is an important thing to realize, so I'm glad we're doing this. This little slot in the link has to face toward this shaft here. This is shaft number 2, I believe. So make sure when you put this in, it's facing that way. Now I'm going to slide this into these 2 holes. You're going to slide into these pins. Now this back side is free to rotate, so you may have to rotate it to a certain position to get it to go in. Okay, oops, almost had it. Just gently slide it in. It should not require any huge amount of force. Everything should fit nicely. Okay, so this is basically what you want to see. You want to see this link with the slot facing this shaft. And at this point, do not attempt to crank the model. If you crank the model now, it will lock up because we don't have the other side on yet. Now, let me rotate it back. Let me just make sure I do this right. This other one is going to go like this with these control horns facing out. So this linkage has to face this way so that the little slot is facing this shaft. So I'm going to screw this one on in this orientation. Okay, I completed attaching the link to the other side, making sure that the slot's pointed this way. Now I just want to make sure before I mount it, make sure you keep it loosey-goosey like I've mentioned before. And now it's going to go right on to this part of the model. Let me put that more into the camera. Since we have the other side on, these should be oriented properly. You shouldn't have to do much to get them in. Now to complete this construction, we're going to slide on these washers, and we're going to put on some O-rings. You can slide these on with your fingers. Oops. They are kind of tiny, I have to say. Okay. Now we're going to just do it on this side, and let's test the kit out after that. Alright, I've attached the O-rings and washers to this side, and the kit is almost complete, but before we complete it, let's crank it and just see how this thing is working. So now, as you can see, if I crank the kit right now, the seahorses go up and down, and this bar of wood that is across which is connecting these 2 cranks is acting as a link. And because they're out of phase by 90 degrees, the mechanism doesn't lock up. It never gets to one of these like terrible positions where the mechanism doesn't know which way to go. So there is just one part missing from the kit. As you notice, the seahorses move up and down, but they're not swiveling. So to get them to swivel, we have to attach a link between here and here. And in the kit, you're going to see 2 nice brass links. So let me take those out. And there are these small little pins. I mean, these are just pins. Now, this step does require a teeny tiny bit of Elmer's glue or some other glue of your choice. So I am going to stop the video for a second and just get a little bit of glue and explain what's going to happen. It's very simple. Alright, now this next step is simple, but it is a little tricky. I'm just using some junky white glue here. You don't need much, you need like almost a dot of glue. So I'm just going to put a little ball of that glue right there on the corner of that piece of paper, I'm going to use a Q-tip to apply it. Now, what I have to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see if I can show you. There is, believe it or not, there is a teeny tiny hole right on the side of this link, and I'm going to try to stick this pin. Okay, there it is. It went through the hole, as you can see. It went through that hole. And now I'm going to take one of these brass links. I don't want to put my finger in the glue there, so I'm just going to move the glue to the side, but I hope the video can try to close up on this a little bit. It's really simple, but I'm just going to slide the slid it out a little bit too far, just what I did not want to do. Okay, let me grab that. I'm going to put this in the hole again. There it is. And now I'm going to try to thread it through the link. Of course, this thing wants to move around, but you should be able to do that. Okay. So, with just a little bit of effort, I'm able to get the pin to go through the hole right there. Now, it's my experience that that pin will probably work its way out unless you just put this little bit of glue. So here is a dot of Elmer's glue, literally a dot. I'm going to put it right behind the pin right there. Right there. See if the camera can pick up the little dot of glue. Okay. The dot of glue is right behind the pin, right there. And grab this other pin. And now you thread this pin through the other hole in the link. And now there is a hole in this shaft as well. Okay. So this is going to go in this hole right like this. See if I can get it in there. And these are tiny holes. It's almost like threading a needle, but I'm threading a pin. Okay, here we go. I feel it going in there. Okay. So this is partly in right there. And again, I feel like it will work its way out. So I'm going to put, and this is a teeny tiny dot of glue right on the outside. And then I'm going to almost wipe it off. I'm going to take a cotton swab and kind of just twist the end. I might even wet it a little bit with my fingertips. And then I'm just going to kind of get most of the glue gone. And now I'm going to push the pin in. Do not make it go in. Don't make it go in all the way. Just let it have a little gap there. A little gap between the link and the pin. There is a teeny amount of glue there. You can, if you want, you can take a piece of paper. Let me just get a little piece of paper and just, I'm just going to clean that little surface. It's just so I don't get glue on there. And just let that dry for like 15 minutes or something like that. And then the kit should be complete. Now I have to do it on the other side as well. Alright, with the addition of these two brass links to the kit, it should now be complete, and let's rotate it and see what sort of action we're getting. So now when I rotate the crank, you can see that the two brass links have added the swivel action to the seahorse figures, and it is the cranks and the long link across them which allows them to go up and down. And so here we have the completed kit. It looks really beautiful. It really elegantly shows you seahorses swimming. Now, as far as the things you can do to change the kit if you want, we talked about it a little. You can change out these horns, these control horns, rotate them to different orientations if you want, so that you can change the orientation of the seahorses. And we talked about how you can cut the stick down and lower some of these seahorses and make their height different. These are all things you can do. But once again, here is the kit. I hope you enjoyed building it. It came out great. And pass it along, show your friends, and that's it. Signing off.